Well, as you well know, February is Black History Month, celebrating the contributions made by African Americans all over the world, especially here in the U.S.
And there are many African Americans with roots right here on Delmarva who impacted the course of American history. One of them is Frederick Douglass. And Brian Spires is in Talbot County this afternoon, a place that had significant meaning to Douglass. Brian.
Well, Lisa and Jimmy, Talbot County is significant in a couple of different ways. This is where Frederick Douglass was born, not far from the Cordova area. This was also the place where he was forced into slavery. And right in front of the courthouse here in Easton, this is where Frederick Douglass returned when he was a free man to speak. And his story is a remarkable one. Take a look.
Frederick Douglass, known to the world as a social reformer, writer, and statesman. But the road to those poignant moments in his life wasn't exactly easy.
I think his relevance today is still so important, and I think that most of us have just scratched the surface of his importance in American history.
Harriet Lowry is a member of the Frederick Douglass Honor Society. She sat down with us at Chesapeake College to share Douglass's story. A story that began at a young age on the Eastern Shore and is well documented in his 3 autobiographies.
At the age of 6 years old, he was taken to the Y Plantation, which is now called the Y House, to be a slave there.
Douglass was one of more than 1,000 slaves who worked on the then 42,000-acre property. Nearly 200 years later, Y House still stands, privately owned, just northwest of Easton.
Frederick Douglass, and most people don't know this, only was a slave at Y House for 2 years, until he was 8 years old. So when you think about the autobiography that he wrote, and the books that he wrote about his life at the time, and how vivid he was, it's really amazing to me anyway that he was only there for 2 years and he was a young child, and to remember so many horrific things that happened during that period.
In 1826, Douglass was sent to Baltimore to continue working as a slave. He became the companion to the son of his slave owner. Harriet says the owner's wife began teaching Douglass how to read, something that was against the law.
Most people just assume that she was, just a kind woman who she was teaching her son how to read, and so Frederick being the same age as her son, she taught him also.
The slave owner eventually put a stop to it, but it became a turning point in Douglass's life. It instilled in him the desire to learn.
Frederick Douglass was one of those people who kept trying to reach for something better, and he knew, I think he knew even before he learned to read that there was something better.
Do you think learning how to read sort of set the stage for what Douglass would become later in life?
He realized that it was something to learning how to read. And he was determined that he was going to learn how and see where it would take him. And he started doing that. He started at that point, he began to pay in food and other ways other white children to teach him how to read. And he would make it a game so that they would not know that that's what they were doing.
Douglass would then spend time working in St. Michael's and then back in Baltimore. During his time as a slave, Douglass planned several escapes, one of which landed him in jail at the Easton Courthouse. But in 1838, his attempt to flee to freedom proved successful with the help of a free black woman named Anna Murray. The two eventually married and settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts. As the years passed, Douglass became an anti-slavery speaker and published several abolitionist newspapers. He also began speaking out about women's suffrage, and at the start of the Civil War, had become well known throughout the country. In fact, during this time, Douglass became close with President Abraham Lincoln.
There was one invitation that Frederick Douglass received from President Abraham Lincoln to come to the White House just for a sit-down talk of the two of them. Frederick Douglass had to decline the invitation because he had already accepted an invitation to speak at another event. And several days later, President Lincoln was assassinated. And so that really laid on Frederick Douglass's heart for some time.
During his many travels, Douglass returned twice to Easton. He went to Y House for a mutual meeting with his former slave owner's family. During another visit, he gave what would become an important speech.
In June of 2011, this statue was dedicated to Frederick Douglass right in front of the courthouse here in Easton, honoring the Talbot County native. Its location has significance. In 1878, Douglass came to this area to speak as a free man. The statue captures that monumental moment.
For him and probably most former slaves, it was probably a triumphant moment. But when he came back to actually speak to people, to a public, that was even more victorious because there was a public viewing of a free man, a free black man.
And that's why members of the Frederick Douglass Honor Society and the community came together to forever capture Douglass's life and legacy.
Tell me what it was like to have that statue dedicated to Douglass in front of the courthouse.
I get chills thinking about it now. It was a long time coming, but I think for me and probably most of the members of the Frederick Douglass Honor Society, what was one of the pivotal moments was when we understood that we had to bring the whole community in.
Do you think the statue was long overdue?
Oh, absolutely. It was long overdue, but everything is within its own time. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know if it had been any earlier, whether everybody would have been ready for it.
Douglass eventually moved to Washington, D.C. and settled there. His wife, Anna, passed away in 1882. Douglass remarried a woman named Helen Pitts. In February of 1895, Douglass gave a speech at a meeting of the National Council of Women. Shortly after, he went home, suffered a heart attack, and died at the age of 77. He led a life of both hardship and awe-inspiring accomplishments. Harriet says even after all this time, his story still resonates with so many people.
For young people especially, I think it gives them not only hope, but aspirations and can inspire them to move forward.
Such a remarkable story. Now, over the course of his life, Douglass had 5 children, and we should also mention that he spent a great deal of time living in New York. That's where he's currently buried at the Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester. So Jimmy and Lisa, certainly a remarkable man and a man who helped impact the course of history as we know it. And with that said, we'll send it back to you guys in the studio.
That's a wonderful statue, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And an incredible story, too.
Yes.
Are men still around like him?
I don't know. They're probably out there.
Somewhere.
Somewhere.
Well, still to come on Delmarva Life, we're all looking for ways to save a few bucks.
For many of us, that may come down to scaling back on the shopping sprees, but for those who are addicted to shopping, that can be hard. WBOC's Aisha Khan joins us next to explain.
But there is one shopping trip that we all got to make, and that's to the grocery store. Dr. Oz has more on how to shop smart while you're there.
Hi, I'm Dr. Oz. Each week at the supermarket, you face endless decisions about what to buy. Don't shop on an empty stomach, or you're likely to spend more on impulse purchases like junk food. Make half of your cart produce, then your dinner plate will be half produce too. And cut the amount of red meat you eat in half, and double your fish and chicken.